I'm Doug from 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast, and welcome to another edition of the Chicken Head Chronicles. This week I'm going to be expanding on a presentation I gave last week at World of Commodore in Canada, the virtual meeting. That meeting did not go as planned for me because my Zoom client went all quirky and freaky. I ended up having to reboot my machine, and in the interest of time I had to cut the presentation way short. It was disappointing, but that's the way that things happen sometimes. Now, I never owned a Commodore 128 as a kid. I always had a tremendous respect for them, but I went from the VIC-20 to the Commodore 64 to the Amiga 500. I had a friend who had a Commodore 128, and it was totally awesome. And I remember even back in the 80s when I would hear people say, oh, all you're going to use a Commodore 128 for is to go into Commodore 64 mode. It just bugged me. It just bothered me. It triggered, I suppose, because I knew there was a ton of really good productivity software that worked in Commodore 128 mode. So I set out to find some really cool productivity software. Now, of course, I immediately found GEOS, which I absolutely love and most of you are familiar with. And the Commodore 128 version of GEOS, especially if you use a nice REU like this 1750 512 kilobyte RAM expansion on a Commodore 128, is just phenomenal in 80-column mode. I love using GeoWrite, I love using the spreadsheet, and there's lots of other apps that are really great. But I know that there were also some great apps in the standard 80-column mode on the Commodore 128, so that's what I want to look at today. Now, when I use the productivity mode on the Commodore 128, I always try and remember to enter fast mode. It's basically you type fast and hit enter, because in 80-column mode it will speed up the 6502 compatible processor, the 8510 I think it is. It'll speed that up into 2 megahertz mode and make everything in that mode run substantially faster. Well, twice as fast. So my first find was Microsoft's Multiplan. This uses Epic's Warple software, which is some kind of copy protection from what I understand, and also a speed up routine to speed up access to the data. Now, before a couple of months ago, I didn't even have any idea Microsoft made a spreadsheet for the Commodore 128, to be honest. But Multiplan was actually a very popular spreadsheet back in the day. It was on everything. Apple's CP/M, the TI-99 4A had a copy, Commodore 64 had a copy. This actually works on the 64 also. And it's really, really a nice, well-designed, and powerful spreadsheet. To be honest, I could probably use Multiplan for about 90% of what I use spreadsheets for in the real world when I use Excel 365 or Excel 2019 or whatever Microsoft is calling it, this week. It is limited to 63 columns by 255 rows, but honestly, that's enough for most of what I do, which is putting together small proposals and putting together some numbers and some spreadsheets. Let's boot it up and take a look at the software. Now, Microsoft Multiplan is a bit different than Excel in that it uses R1, C1 conventions instead of modern A1 conventions. Basically, it means that both rows and columns are numbers, as you can see here. So we look at the columns at the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc. And the rows going down are also numerical, where with Excel we'd have A, B, C at the top and 1, 2, 3 on the columns. Now, the cool thing is, basically you use R for row and C for column, instead of this being A2, this would be R2, C1. It's easy once you get the hang of it. Now, this particular program supports 63 columns and 255 rows, which is not too bad in the overall scheme of things. There are other spreadsheets for the Commodore 128 that support more rows and columns, but this works pretty good. Everything is keyboard based, as you'd expect, no mouse support on here. At the bottom of the screen you have this menu. If you look down at the bottom here, we've got alpha, blank, copy, delete, edit. It's just like a menu that you'd use, except use the first letter to get to anything. So if we wanted to go to the transfer menu, we'd get T. And now we can use the tab key to go back and forth between our menu items, and the escape key to go back to our regular one. So if we want to look at insert, we'd hit I for insert. Now we can either hit row, R for row or C for column, or we could use the tab key to go back and forth and enter to select it. Works really well. Let's create a simple spreadsheet showing the vast amounts of money you can make being a YouTube creator. So this will just be a nice quick spreadsheet. We're going to start here in row 1, column 3, and type 10 mark profits. Now notice it says value at the bottom. If I try and enter this right now, it's not going to know what that is because it's not an alphanumeric character. It does not automatically go to alphanumeric mode. So what you want to do is you want to tell it it's alpha by hitting A. Now we're in alpha mode. Now we can type in 10 mark profits. And when we hit enter, there it is right at the top of the screen. Now notice the width of the column does not show all of the text. So we can go to our format menu, which is F. We can go to width. We can either tab over to it or we can hit W. Width of the column, let's go to 14 wide. Let's see how that does. Look at that. 10 mark profit. We're missing an S, so we're going to go one wider. Now we can go over to R2, row 2, column 2 here. Now look in the bottom left-hand corner. It actually tells us which row and column we're in, which is kind of nice. And we're going to go into alphanumeric mode, alpha, and we're going to type January, Jan / June. Now, if we want to stay in alphanumeric mode and go to another column, we can use the cursor keys to move over. See, as I'm cursoring over, it still says alpha value at the bottom. So we're going to go January through June. Now we're going to go July through December here. All right. Now, those are both left justified, which is fine, but we want to center that text right there. So here's what we can do with that. Again, we're going to go into format mode with F. We're going to format cells, so C. Now watch this. It says format cells R2 to C2. I want to do R2, C2 through R2, C4. So I just right here hit colon, R2, C4. Now I hit the tab key to go to my next area, which says alignment. I can go, oops, there's alignment. Now I want to go C for center. And when I hit enter, it aligns my columns. Pretty cool, huh? And it does it for both of these areas here. Now both of those are centered. Now down here, we want to put our tremendous YouTube advertising profits. So we're going to type YouTube. Okay, again, we forgot to hit alpha. Alpha. YouTube ad profits. Now, of course, we're not going to have room here. And in this column, we want to widen up this column in general because we're going to put several things in here. So again, we go C for column. I'm sorry, F for format. We're going to do width, and we're going to go 15. Why not? There we go. Now we have plenty of room, and it opened up all of these columns right here to be 18 wide. Now we're going to go down here. We're going to type expenses. We want that to be an alpha. And we're going to type in miscellaneous expenses. We're going to cursor down. It'll stay in alpha mode. We're going to go to promotions. Cursor down, stays in alpha mode, and we're going to do retro hardware purchase. Now here, we want to add some numbers right here to reflect what we've brought in and what we've spent. So if we just type here, it will automatically go into value mode. So let's say we made $55 in those 6 months in YouTube advertising. See, I told you, you can make millions. It comes up with a number 55, but there's no dollar signs, there's no decimal points, nothing like that. So we want to make this look better. So we're going to format our cells. So F for format, C for cells. Now here's where we can tell it where we want to format it to. And let's do row 3, column 2, which is where we're at, and then a colon. We're going to do row, let's say 15, column 4, because we're going to put in more numbers. Row 15, column 4. Now we're going to tab over. We don't care about the alignment right yet. We may work on that for a second, so we tab one more time. And see that little dollar sign right down there? We can hit the dollar sign, and suddenly these become numbers. And anything I type in these rows and columns here that I've just told it to format will come out as numbers. So if I do 43 here, hey, it's a number. Let's blank that out with B, blank cells, there we go. Now let's go ahead and put in the rest of our numbers here. So we're going to do $67 in ad revenue in the last 6 months of the year. Wonder if I'll break even this year. Geez, at this rate I'll be able to retire in the year 4738. And I just kind of hope my Commodore 128 still works at that time. So under expenses, let's put in miscellaneous expenses. Let's do $125 there, $145 here. That's buying miscellaneous equipment. Promotions, that's like shipping things to everybody and working on the Amiga art contest and all the prizes for that. Let's do the first part of the year was only $56. And here we are at $180. Retro hardware expenses. Let's see, the first 6 months of the year was about $850. The second part of the year, because I bought the Vampire, we're going to do this at $1,250 with all the stuff I bought. Now let's see what we need to do next. Let's do a total profit. So we're going to go into alphanumeric here. Oh, we're already in alpha mode. Total profit. We're going to grab this number from the top. Now, if I added in, Patreon funds, I could do a new column and insert it and do Patreon funds there, but we're just having a little fun here. This is going to be a value. So we're going to type the equal sign. We could also hit V for value, but we can do equals. We're going to do sum, which is just the same as you do in Excel, parentheses, R3C2. That should pull down the numbers from the top. Yep. Now, we could copy this over. I want to show you how to do this. We could copy this formula over to this row, but unfortunately, it does not magically change the rows and the numbers. If you want to copy, you go copy. We're going to copy right and number 2 over. So it actually copies it. Whoops, I should have told it only to do 1 over. But it copies it into both fields, which I don't need. So we're going to blank. But you see, it doesn't actually change the formula. Now, to edit the formula or edit anything, we hit E for edit. Now, if we just try to use the cursor keys here to edit it, see, it just moves the actual cell over and not the cursor. So what we want to do in edit mode is we want to use, when we're in here, we want to hit Shift and then F4 and F6, and then we can go back and forth in our formula here. So that's Shift, F4, F6 to change the formula. It's still row 3, but this is going to be column 4. Then it's going to pull the number down. There we go. Now, we'll just go down here and let's see total expenses. We're going to add some numbers up here. So we want to add R6C2 through R8C2. So we're going to do a formula again. So equal sign. sum R6C2 colon R8C2. No problem at all. Adds up the total expenses. Here we're going to do the same here. Let's do a little line here as a matter of fact, just to make things look neater and tidier. So we're going to go up one, and since there are no fancy borders here, we're just going to use the dash symbol to make a little dividing line here. There we go. And then we're going to do amazing profits. And here, just a quick little formula to show how easy it is. We're going to do equals sum R12C2 C2 minus, no, that's supposed to be R10, 10C2 minus R12C2. Let's see how much profit we made. Not bad, not bad at all. Negative $976. And we'll just do the same here just for laughs. Well, okay, maybe we didn't do so well this year. There's always next year. Now, there are other great features like the ability to copy and move cells like I talked about, move things around. To save things, we can hit the T, and then we can hit S for save, give it a file name, and it will save either to drive 8 by default, or you can do 9, comma, this is 10 mark SS. Hit enter, it saves the file. Now, there are some other cool things that we can do. One of them is we can save this as a text file and then use that text file to import into another program. Now, if you want to save it as just raw text that you can then import into your computer on your PC or put into another word processing program, what you do is you do print. Now, normally you'd send it to the printer if you want to send it to the printer, but in this case, we can tell it print to a file, and we're going to call this 10 mark SS text. And it's going to save it as a sequential file, but just in raw ASCII format, so we'll be able to edit it in other programs. Now here's where the really cool stuff comes in. We're going to transfer, and we're going to save this in a file called symbolic. Now what's cool about this symbolic mode is this is a Microsoft standard mode that was created in the early 80s, basically for some types of data transfer. It saves the spreadsheet in a special mode that can absolutely be opened up in Microsoft Excel or LibreOffice or almost any other spreadsheet today. I'll show you here in a few minutes, but we really save these files as a symbolic file. Then we can copy them over to our SD to IEC, bring it over to the PC, edit out one little line at the top that I'll show you here in a few minutes when I show you my data transfer information, and open this up in Excel. And it brings everything up, formulas and everything. And the reason it does this is because Excel still absolutely can work in R1 C1 mode instead of the A1 mode that most spreadsheets work in now. It just doesn't do it by default. It has the feature turned off. You open up a symbolic file, boom, your Excel spreadsheet transfers over to R1 C1 mode. Everything's intact. It is about the coolest thing in the world. And it goes both ways. You can take a file in Excel, save it as a symbolic link file, put it on your SD card, bring it over to your Commodore 128, load the thing up right here on your computer. It's on your Commodore 128. It's amazing. No productivity software presentation would be worth anything if you didn't talk about word processing. I found a copy of Fleet System 3 for the Commodore 128. This supports either 128 column or 132 column mode, which just scrolls the screen, which is pretty cool. The other cool thing about this word processor, besides having all the standard word processing features, is this has a 90,000 word dictionary that actually works pretty good. I ran the dictionary on my script for this presentation, found a bunch of misspelled stuff, because, you know, typing on these Commodore keyboards, you miss a key every now and again. it was really actually pretty good. Let's take a quick look at the software. So Fleet System 3, as you can see here, works pretty well. It's a standard word processor. To open up a file, you hit Shift, Clear Home. Now you can tell it to recall a file if you want to. Or what we can do is we can hit F1 and we can hit 0 for drive 0 and hit enter, and it will come up with a directory of whatever's on drive 8 that's in the standard, which is in the standard Fleet System format. Then you can cursor over to your file, hit Shift, Clear Home, recall a file, and then we can hit the up arrow, not the cursor key, the actual physical up arrow to the left of restore, and it brings the file name right up there. So it's kind of an interesting way to load things from a directory. You know, once you get used to it, it works pretty good, but it's a little tricky to figure out at first. So it brings up your file. Everything works as normal. Right here, if you want to, you can put in all of your printer codes. So if you want to tell it, you know, it's 66 lines, 75 columns, you can set your margins by using printer codes here at the top, which is kind of cool. You also have features like inserting lines, deleting lines, standard text editing. It's a fast word processor and it does a fine job. It also gives you the ability, when you go to save a file, it would store it in standard sequential mode, which is its own proprietary format, or you could hit the A key and see how it says ASCII up at the top, and now when we save the file, it stores it in standard ASCII text, which means we can then import that file into Windows or into the Mac and read the file on our regular computer, which is actually really cool. It does bring me to one of the problems I found with it and also the next program that I'm going to be looking at, which is Paperback Writer 128. It's the way they handle disk drives. Now on Multiplan, I could hit 8, file name, 9, file name, and it'll load those files or save those files to drive 8 or drive 9, because a lot of us, especially today, have multiple drives on our Commodores. With these word processors, they support dual drives too. They support more than one drive, but you have to do drive 0 or drive 1, which is a dual drive system like they had on the PETs, the old PET drives, and you'll see a picture of the PET drive up there. You know, where drive 0 is the drive on the left, drive 1 is the drive on the right. It works fine then. You can put a disk in either drive and open them up, drive 0, drive 1, copy back and forth all day long. But they didn't make a dual drive for the Commodore 64 or the Commodore 128, so why did these people code their software to work with drive 0 and drive 1 and not drive 8 and drive 9? I tried for hours to figure out a way to get both Fleet Systems and Paperback Writer to read drive 9. Doesn't care. Only wants 0 or 1. Doesn't make sense. Don't know what the guys were thinking. Let's take a look at another really great word processor that I actually like quite a bit. This is Paperback Writer 128. There's also a version of this for the Commodore 64. This one has a smaller dictionary. This one's only like a 30,000 word dictionary. And the dictionary only works if you boot up into 40 column mode. It's a separate program. You don't initiate the spell check from within the program like you do with Fleet Systems. In Fleet Systems, I initiate the spell check. It says, okay, put in the spell check disk. Boom, it spell checks. With this, you save your file, you reboot into 40 column mode, and you run the spelling checker in 40 column mode. It's weird, but you know, it's doable, and I find I use it less because it's not as convenient. But the interface for this is superior to Fleet Systems in many ways. Let's take a quick look. In Paperback Writer, you have to select your printer at the very beginning every time you boot the software. So in my case, I've got a Star Micronics printer that will emulate this 802.1526 just fine. I would normally choose that. If I want to save my Paperback Writer files in ASCII format for use in other programs, I would have to choose an ASCII printer, because when you save it in ASCII format, you have to actually print a file, and it prints an ASCII file. Not hard to do. You just need to remember, if you're going to use it in ASCII, to use it in a different program, select the ASCII printer. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Now here, this is cool because you have a menu up at the top, and it tells you what to do. Press the Commodore key. Okay, look at the directory. Let's put our disk back in with our files. And again, it only wants disk 0 or disk 1. You hit disk 1, it doesn't look for disk 9. It looks for disk 1, which doesn't exist. So we're going to hit disk 0. We're going to look at all the files, look at the directory, and see what's on this disk. We've got our CHC 128B prod B. That's what we're going to load. So Commodore key, load a file, CHC 128 prod B. Hit enter, loads up the file. Once the file's loaded, you can maneuver around in it just fine. Now you will notice you lose a bit of screen real estate by having the menu at the top, but it's not a big deal. Now down here, you'll be able to see where I imported an actual spreadsheet in ASCII mode directly into my script. That just came right out of Multiplan, and I was able to import it right into my script, which is actually pretty darn cool, kind of a cool feature. From here, you have more control over your file in easier ways than you do with Fleet systems. You can hit the escape key, and it's going to let you set your left margins, right margins, centering, justification, spacing for printing, headers, footers. It gives you some cool text formatting features, more of in a menu format as opposed to Fleet systems, which everything is, you just have to know the keystroke. Hit the escape key. From here, we can hit escape. We can hit Commodore. It brings us up to all of our disk options and printing options, which is kind of fun too. When you want to print a file, you just hit the P key, it sends it right to the printer. But if you want to have control of your printing, you do Shift P, pause at the end of each page. You do that if you just had a single sheet feeder like on a Commodore 803. Merge with mail text for doing mail merges. Number of copies, how many you want to print. Create disk file instead of printing. If I hit yes here, it is going to generate an ASCII file and save it to the disk. It'll ask you a file name, and that is how we print an ASCII file for use in other programs. We don't actually want to do this. File. Now you can hear my beautiful printer printing in the background. We're going to cancel that out. We don't need to print. Join will allow you to combine two files together, which is kind of fun. It just puts one at the end of the other file. You can always hit the Commodore key to go back. Now here's a cool feature here. If you hold down Shift and then Alt, look what happens. It changes that 64K that we saw at the top. I'm going to shift back. 64K, 32K. Now what you have is you now have two pages that you can keep open, two files of up to 32K each that you can switch between by just hitting the Alt key. We're in file 2, and this is a nice test. I could open up an entirely different file right in here, and I could then copy, I spelled test wrong. I could then copy and paste between the two files just by highlighting text and copying. I'll show you how to do that real quick. And you can hit Alt again to go back to your other file. So if I wanted to do, say, a range of text, I'll do Control R and use the cursor keys to select alpha and type in Technomark Profits, and then Control R to tell it the end of the range. Now from here, I could paste it someplace else by just hitting Control C. See, it copied it right up there. You can also use this to move things around. So if you've got, say, this whole column here that you want to absolutely move, we can set a range right here. And we're going to do Control R to tell it to finish the range. Now we'll move down and we'll put it right here because we want to mess up my file. Control, move. Now it's basically a copy or a cut and a paste. It gets rid of it here and it put it right down there, which is kind of cool. Now this next thing I want to show you is really cool. This is called Partner128. Now this was referred to me by my friend Sutek, who I know from Twitter. He's another Commodore guy, does some cool stuff. So look him up on Twitter. This is a combination of a cartridge and software that can do some really cool things. This uses the Commodore 128's windowing mode, which allows you to actually create windows on your screen. The Commodore Plus 4 and the C16 also have those features, but it's features that nobody really uses. It allows you to open up these windows right on top of a program that's already running without interrupting that program. Let me show you the hardware and then I'll show you how it works. There's my lovely Commodore 128D. I still have to thank so much my friend John from CommodoreForever.net for selling this to me. It is a thing of beauty, and we'll do a whole show on it soon. But around the back, in this cartridge slot, you see it says Partner 128 right there. That's the actual Partner 128 cartridge. It has a big button on the top that we'll be using in a second, and then it plugs right into joystick port 2. Now it says right in the manual you can get a splitter if you want to keep joystick 2 plugged in at the same time. It works fine with a splitter. This is just used to send some commands to the Commodore 128. But let's take a look at what this little beauty can actually do. Now you'll see we're back in Multiplan right here. And everything works fine. You see I can cursor around and go to all my different things. But when I hit the button on my Partner 128 card on the back of my 128, it brings up a whole new screen. And you hit escape, you're right back at your main screen and your spreadsheets or your word processor's working fine. But let's take a look at what this cartridge can do. Option number 1 is appointment calendar. Now, it's obviously January 1986, so we're just going to use that. It only goes up to 1998, which is a big disappointment, but it's still fun to play with. You see on the 15th here, I've got an appointment created. Let's go in there. I've got meet Dr. Spock to get head examined at 3:30. If I want to create a new appointment, let's say on the 16th, we can do groceries. So we're going to type a little abbreviation. We're going to buy eggs. Or buy, let's call that buy groceries. And then we're going to tab to the next one. We're going to say eggs. We're going to say milk and tequila. Sounds like a good shopping list. And if we want to set a time, we'll say 2 o'clock. Now when we hit escape, grocery. So we have doctor on the 15th, grocery on the 16th, and we can create multiple events and multiple calendars and then save these for later recall. After we reboot the machine, we can load our calendar back in, or we can print our calendar out and it will actually print out all of our appointments, which is kind of cool. We're going to hit escape, go back to the menu. This is a useful one, the Memo Pad. Okay, we're not going to save those to disk. This you can do. This is a happy, whoops, can't even spell, test. Now, when we go back to our spreadsheet and we do a bunch more work, we can then call this back up. Boom. Go back into Memo Pad. All of our stuff is still there. We can also save this to disk and save it permanently and then call it back later. If we want to bring in a text file, let's hit F1 and let's say we want to bring a file in. Look at our files here. 10 mark ASCII. That sounds good. Return to load. Now what it's actually really doing is loading up the spreadsheet, a copy of the spreadsheet that I had created. This is an ASCII spreadsheet that I created in Multiplan. Bring it right up in the Memo Pad. Do what you want with it. Bring up whatever text file you want. Do what you want with it. Actually kind of cool. Now, where it says Typewriter Mode here, F4 for typewriter, we're going to hit F4. We're going to do Hello Happy People. As soon as I hit enter, hear my printer go right there. It literally just typed that out on the printer. This is a fun video. Prints it out. Works like a typewriter where you can print line by line. That's cool. F4 to get out of that mode. Address and phone list. Number 3. No, we don't want to save that. We don't really care. Here we've got your typical address lists. Biff Spinkle. Tab down. 1313 Mockingbird Lane. You fill out all of these different fields here just like you would with a regular address list, and then save the list. You save it under whatever name you want to. You can then print labels out of here. If you hit F7, you can choose to print labels, or if you have a modem attached to this, a physical modem and a physical phone line, you can hit the F6 key and you can use this thing to dial the phone number. Then you pick up the phone and talk to the person. Imagine that. Back in 1986, you're working in your spreadsheet here, and you're like, you know, I got to call Biff Spinkle. I got to ask him about this particular report here. So you hit your button on your device, you go to your address book, hey, there's Biff Spinkle, and you hit F6 to dial your modem. And we have no phone number here, so it's not really going to do us any good. Okay, with no modem in here, it's not even going to get me to the interface screen, but that would then try and dial your modem so you can connect. It's actually really cool. Hit escape. Now, here's a good one, a calculator. We have a numeric keypad on here. 1, 2, 3 plus 3, 2, 1 equals 444. And it works with all the standard features. And you can also hit the F7 key, and you can hear my printer again. It prints out 444 minus 222. It prints out the paper tape of exactly what we're doing, again, while the spreadsheet is sitting there waiting for us in the background. Print screen does exactly what you'd think. It prints whatever's on the screen. DOS and printer commands allow you to go in and send commands to the printer. You can format disks, so if you're in the middle of a program and you need to format a floppy, you can just go right into Partner 128 and format a disk, validate a file, print to a specific printer. Kind of cool. Swift Lock, what that does is that allows you to set a passcode for your computer. So you can set up Swift Lock, put a password of 1234 in there, walk away from your computer. Nobody can use your Commodore 128 unless they know the passcode, or they turn off your computer and unplug the cartridge. That works too. Not exactly high-tech security, but it works. This setup program allows you to go in, change which printer you're using, whether it's ASCII, change your default drive number. Here's this weird thing again. Drive 0/1. Come on, nobody has one of those drives. They don't exist. There's where you'd set up your modem, and they've got modem strings in the manual to set up for different kinds of modems. Actually, really, really kind of cool. Go back here, we're right back in our spreadsheet. I would be remiss in talking about productivity software without at least mentioning getting on a BBS and using online services with your Commodore 128. I'm going to do a special episode on that very soon. To get online with your Commodore 128, you can use a device like Jim Brain's 64NIC Plus, which uses the RRNet protocol, and hook up a networking card directly to it. The thing talks via TCP/IP. Now you can do things like get on the web and, theoretically check your email and things like that. I'll go into that later. Today we just want to talk about BBSs. With this, you can use something like the Kipperterm program that talks directly to the card, and you can browse the BBSs right with this card. Or you can use something like the Wi-Fi cards that I'm showing right here. Now, a lot of people make these. These plug right into the user port and will talk with your Wi-Fi router Pretty easy setup. I'll go over that in a video later. But this allows you to get on standard bulletin board systems because it tricks your Commodore 64, VIC-20, 128 into thinking it's actually using a modem. Now, I got mine from my friend John at CommodoreForever.net. They're 30 bucks. They're a great deal. On the Commodore 128, they're really limited to 2400 baud because if you try and enable the 9600 baud modes, it interferes with the fast burst mode on the disk drives on here, and so you decide, do I want fast internet or do I want fast drives? I go for fast drives, but on a Commodore 64 you can theoretically trick it into going up to 9600 baud. Let's take a quick look at how it works. Now, the program that I'm using with my modem is this one called Multiterm 128. I find that it does a fantastic job. There are other programs out there that work just fine, but Multiterm is great. When you get it loaded, it gives you some choices of what you want to do. In this case, we could, if we wanted to, go to the configuration menu, set it for 40 or 80 columns, what drive number to use, open setup files, change text colors, baud rate, etc. What we want to do, though, is just go into terminal mode. So we hit T for terminal. Now, how do you dial a modem that's not a modem? Well, let's turn it on. We're going to hit ATC1 and Commodore Forever 2.3 Wi-Fi modem connected to SSID Potato. And there's my IP address of my card. Now, I do ATDT, and let's do Particles BBS .dynds.org :6400. 6400 is the telnet port number that it uses. When you hit the enter key, it comes right up and it says, sorry, busy. Hey, what a great demo. We'll try another one here. We're going to connect to Skynet. Hit enter. Are you using Commodore Graphics Terminal? Yep. And here it comes in 80 column mode. And look at this. This is from our friend Commodore Kaz on Twitter and his cool Skynet BBS. And let's put in my username. Yay! 10 mark is loaded. And it brings up the BBS screen. Absolutely awesome. And 2400 baud, it works pretty well. I mean, it really is fairly fast, all things considered. Let's see if I have any mail. Oh, no mailbox. Oh, bummer. But of course, in here, just like any BBS, you can go in and you can read your messages, you can upload and download files, and go and browse your messages. Works absolutely perfectly. Very, very useful. Now, there's absolutely no reason that you cannot use a BBS to upload one of your files to, one of these ASCII text files, and then log into the same BBS on your PC, download the ASCII text file to transfer it to your PC. Works fine. You know what else you can do? You can set up some basic telnet software on your PC, a basic BBS or basic telnet software. Telnet into your own PC that's in the other room, transfer files to it that way. Why not? Works fine. So I want to show you how you can use your ASCII files that we've converted over in our programs in the Commodore 128 on your PC. First of all, just copy them over to your SD to IEC. I use draw copy for mine. I'll put the link in the description for that. When you get them over onto your PC, you're going to see they're called .p00 files. And if you click them, they'll default to try and open to your Vice session. What you want to do, here's my word processing file. Right click, and you want to open this with Notepad. And you're going to see it's got this funky file name at the top, C64 file, and then the name of the file. I think the SD to IEC puts that there, and you're going to want to save that. But you can see it brings things over as really nice text files. Now, from Fleet Systems, it adds this quotation mark at the beginning, but that's easy enough to just do a find and replace and edit out that quotation mark. Not a big deal. With our SLK files, they'll come over, and I named this one WOC SSSLK. They also come over as P00 files. Right click, and you're going to open it with Notepad, and you're going to see it's a bunch of nonsense on here. But this is the important thing. You need to take out this particular section at the top where it says C64 and then the name of the file. If you keep that there, it will not open in Excel. Now we can just save it. Now what I did is I just renamed it to an SLK file. So now when I double click it, it will actually launch Excel and open up the file for us immediately. There's our file. See, it's an R1 C1 format. We don't have any ABCs at the top. It does all the math properly. It brings all the math right over, and you can just use these right on your computer. And you can do this the same way. You can create a basic text type Excel spreadsheet. You can save it, file, save as an SLK file, save it onto your SD to IEC, open that little guy right up in Multiplan. It is genius. Everything I showed you today, from the spreadsheets, the word processors, the Partner 128 program, the bulletin board systems, all of that 100% available back in 1986 for our Commodore 128s. All right? Now, the whole package probably would have cost about $1,000 for everything, maybe $1,100, $1,200 for everything. But when you compare that with a PC of the day, which would set you back $3,000 to $3,500 for a state-of-the-art, XT machine, or maybe an AT machine back in the day, what could it do that this machine couldn't? Not much. Seriously, not much at all. And you saved yourself a couple of grand. And let's be honest, the Commodore 128, with its ability to go into Commodore 64 mode and play 10,000 different games, it's icing on the cake. To summarize, using the Commodore 128 for productivity back in the 80s would have been phenomenal. You could do almost anything you needed to on it to run a small business. Using it in 2020 to do work, my entire script, I created that in Fleet Systems. I edited it in Paperback Writer and sent it over to ASCII to look it over on my PC. I printed it on my beautiful 9-pin printer. Works fine. Did all the spreadsheets in Multiplan. Works fine. Now I have not even touched on CPM mode on the Commodore 128, where you've got thousands of business programs that you could run on your Commodore 128 in CPM mode. Now, yes, it's true, CPM on the Commodore 128 was slower than on other machines because of how it addressed the processors. But that's balanced out by the fact that it was like the only machine out there that could read multiple formats of CPM. You got a K-Pro? Yeah, this will read it. You got an Osborne? Yeah, this will read it. You got another machine? Yeah, this will read it. It doesn't care. It reads most of the disks. You can't say that about the other CPM machines of the day. I would like to thank my wonderful patrons for helping me out, supporting this channel. They're the ones that make sure I can get this old software and find it and actually afford to buy it, and things like this Partner 128 program that I'm demoing for you. I think I'll do a full demo on that later. If you'd like to join and help support me on Patreon, patreon.com/10mark. We'd love to have you aboard. But here's a nice little thank you in Commodore Basic for my Patreons. Thank you for joining me today. Follow me on Twitter at 10mark1. Please like and subscribe to this video, and I would love it if you guys would comment below and tell me what your favorite Commodore 128 or even Commodore 64 productivity software was, so I can look for it, explore it, test it out, and maybe do more videos on it in the future. Really, really would appreciate that. Like and subscribe, I'd love it. But until next time, this is Doug from 10 Minute Amiga Retrocast, signing out.